Oh, oh my God. Sorry, guess I didn't see there. Um, hey, so, um, okay, I'm a little unprepared here. Just kidding. Today's lesson is about it's a moral dilemma on the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. I want to tie back in a little bit of what we learned about a couple weeks ago and last week with the Underground Railroad system. So, in order for me to do that and get you started here, I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to point your attention to the image that's in your actual assignment. That's due Friday, by the way. So, this is your assignment right here. It is once again due Friday, April 17th. It was posted yesterday, but you do not have to actually start it until tomorrow if you don't want to. So, let's just take a look at this picture really quickly. So, if you remember what the Underground Railroad was, it was a series of safe houses that would go from the American South, right? So, Texas and all the way over when Texas eventually joins. And they were these churches or hospitals or whatever, people's houses, cabins, farm cabins, from what we can see in this dilemma that you'll read, that were designed to get slaves to free territories, and even so to the Canadian regions or even into Mexico. Mexico banned slavery in the early 1820, I'm sorry, late 1820s. And I believe it was the mid 1830s that Canada ends up abolishing, I should say, slavery as well. It's not going to be abolished in the United States until 1865 after the American Civil War is fought. And that's where our studies for seventh grade social studies are going to end. So, if you're just examining this map really quickly, all these darker shaded states are slave states. This is what we called the South, or eventually what will become the Confederate States of America in 1860, technically. And all these lighter shades up here are territories and free states. So, states that did not practice slavery. This white up here is British Canada. Remember, Canada was British rule for a very long time, and they're going to continue to be for the rest of our studies here. And so, just to kind of tie back what we were doing last week with the Underground Railroad piece there, the New York and the Underground Railroad piece. The reason that they wanted the slaves, freed slaves, runaway slaves, what they called them, or fugitives, somebody who's running away from the law, even though it was a horrible law. The reason that they wanted to get to Canada was because in Canada, slavery was illegal at that time. So if they were to make it all the way up to Canada, they were no longer subject to the American law that slaves had to be returned. And so before 1850, it was private bounty hunters that were hired by slave plantation owners, aristocrats, who would go to retrieve their slaves that were runaway or what they thought were stolen at the time as well. In 1850, as sectionalism continues to pull the United States apart, it becomes law as part of a compromise. And it's going to be called the Compromise of 1850, which we will learn about in a couple of weeks. And it becomes federal law that you cannot house runaway slaves. And if you are caught housing runaway slaves, you are subject to being put in jail, as well as a pretty hefty fine, which means that you'd have to pay money. So helping runaway slaves was something that was now illegal in 1850, about 10 years before we're going to be pushed towards war. And so for today's assignment, what the eventual outcome is going to be is that you're going to write me a paragraph. And again, you can do braces if you like the structure of braces, but I'm not making it necessary for you to write a braces paragraph. This is a 40-point assignment, and I'm looking for you to persuade me. So the question that you're going to have to answer by the end of the lesson is, should John, who we're going to be introduced to in a second, turn them in, them being the fugitive runaway slaves? So here we go. And again, it's just like every moral dilemma we've ever done. It could be Well, actually, there's not really going to be discussion because we don't really have each other in here. But actually, tomorrow's office hours, if you'd like, Wednesday's office hours, we could debate it a little bit if you'd like. So here we go. It's called Fugitive Slave Act 1850. So John owns a small farm in New Jersey in 1851. One night he hears strange noises coming from the barn. When he arrives in the old building, he discovers two young men in their late teens hiding in the hayloft. They tell him they are running away from their master in Virginia. They are heading north in hopes of making their way to Canada, where they will be safe. They beg John to hide them for the night. John's taking kind of a big risk here, guys, by not even just immediately turning these guys over. Back to this. They need to they need time to find their way to the Underground Railroad that runs nearby. They believe bounty hunters are on their trail. If found, they will be beaten, chained, and returned to their former plantation owner in Virginia. And again, sectionalism. Remember, we have the North and we have the South. Northerners are pretty much mostly against slavery, the horrible practices of it. So this Northerner, John, knows that if these guys are turned into bounty hunters, or even if they're caught by the bounty hunters who they feel are chasing them, it's not going to turn out so good for anybody. So he has this really difficult decision to make. Okay. The Fugitive Slave Law in 1850 states that anyone caught hiding runaway slaves could be arrested, jailed, and fined up to $1,000. Remember, $1,000 is a lot back then. The bounty hunters have the right to arrest the runaways and John as well. So, the decision here is, should John turn them in? If you say yes, John is immediately going to turn these runaway fugitives to the bounty hunters, where they'll be returned to these horrible practices. John knows that if he turns them over, then those slaves are going to, I shouldn't say slaves, those runaways are going to be beaten, chained, and kind of abused on their way back. If he does not turn them in, well, then John knows that he's doing the right moral, ethical thing, but he also risks those bounty hunters running into him and kind of getting caught for housing them and hiding them. So the law is very intentional and meant to kind of intimidate people from stopping slaves running away. And the reason for that is because the Underground Railroad was unbelievably successful. While it was a really difficult thing to kind of, I guess, run, it was extremely successful because of all of the people who kind of were coordinated with it. They were able to get a lot of slaves up through Canada as well, which ultimately was pretty amazing. But again, the decision is yours today to make. You're going to either highlight yes, John should turn those slaves in, or no, John should not turn those slaves in for the moral ethical reasons, although he could face that penalty. A lot of people were caught during this time as well, although the Underground Railroad was quite successful. If you have questions, feel free to write them in the private comments. And today's Tuesday. Tomorrow, Wednesday, I'll be having my office hours at 11:30. Feel free to join then, and we could discuss. Adios, muchachos.